They say power corrupts. I say it reveals. When you hold the lives of thousands in your hands, when you can unmake a warrior with a whisper or raise the dead to serve your will, you don't become something you weren't. You become exactly what you always were, with all pretense burned away. I am Gul'dan, warlock of the Horde, and I have never believed in honor. I believed in truth. The truth that strength decides everything. The truth that the weak deserve their suffering because they lack the will to escape it. The truth that the world is not fair, has never been fair, and that only fools waste their lives pretending otherwise. What happens when someone stops pretending? What happens when you look at the structure of reality, see it clearly for the first time, and decide that if the game is rigged, you will learn to rig it better than anyone else? I was born in Frostfire Ridge to the Shadow Moon clan, into a body that betrayed me from the first breath. My legs twisted beneath me. My spine curved wrong. While other children learned to hunt, I learned what it meant to be looked at with pity. Pity is worse than hatred. Hatred acknowledges you as a threat. Pity sees you as something broken that should be discarded quietly. The shamans of my clan spoke of balance, of the elements responding to those who approached with humility and respect. They spoke of tradition and harmony. I watched them perform their rituals and saw something else entirely. I saw negotiation. I saw beings of pure elemental force lowering themselves to bargain with creatures whose lives spanned decades, while the elements had existed since the world's making. The elements did not serve out of love. They served because they were bound by pacts whose terms the shamans barely understood themselves. There was no balance. There was only power and the illusion of balance that the powerful allowed. My mother tried to teach me the shaman ways. She believed that if I could not hunt or fight, perhaps I could commune with the spirits and find worth in that calling. I tried. For years I tried. I sat in meditation and felt nothing. I called to the wind and heard only silence. The other apprentices could coax fire from their palms or draw water from dry ground. I could barely make a pebble shift. They told me I lacked the proper respect, that my heart was not open to the spirit's wisdom. What they meant was that I was defective, that my crippled body reflected a crippled soul, that even the elements themselves rejected me. I learned then what I would prove again and again throughout my life. The powerful create stories to justify why they deserve power and why the powerless deserve nothing. The shamans said the elements chose the worthy. What they did not say was that the elements chose those who already possessed the physical strength to endure the rituals, the social standing to demand training, the healthy bodies that marked them as blessed by fate. I had none of these things. Therefore, I deserved none of their gifts. Therefore, my suffering was right and natural. I hated them. I hated every shaman who looked at me with sympathy and moved on to students who showed more promise. I hated the hunters who mocked me. I hated the children who learned to avoid me because associating with the cripple might taint them by proximity. But most of all, I hated myself. I hated my weakness. I hated that I could do nothing about the injustice of my existence except endure it. Hatred is a gift. They do not tell you this. They tell you that hatred poisons the soul, that it consumes you from within. What they do not tell you is that hatred is clarity. Hatred burns away all the comfortable lies you tell yourself about the world. It shows you exactly where you stand and exactly what must change. I stood at the bottom. I was nothing. My clan valued strength, and I had none. They valued tradition, and I could not perform even its most basic rites. They valued beauty, and I was twisted. What did I have? I had my mind, I had my hatred, and I had the willingness to do what others would not. There was an old orc in my clan named Rulken. She had been a powerful shaman once, but age and tragedy had broken something in her. Her daughter had died during a failed vision quest. After that, Rulken stopped performing the proper rituals. She stopped showing the elements the respect that was supposedly required. She began experimenting with techniques the other shamans whispered about in disapproval. She was drawing on the element's power without asking permission. She was taking rather than negotiating. The clan elders tolerated her because she had once been great and because she kept to herself. They watched her with unease but did not stop her. I watched her with fascination. I came to her in my 14th year and asked to learn. She looked at me with eyes that had already seen too much and asked what I was willing to give. Everything, I told her. She smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. Good, she said, because everything is what it will cost. Gul'dan taught me that the shamanic traditions were a choice, not a requirement. The elements responded to will, to force, to the clear imposition of consciousness upon unconsciousness. The rituals were training wheels. The respect was a negotiating stance that kept the practitioners safe from backlash, but also limited what they could take. If you were willing to risk the backlash, willing to endure the pain of forcing the elements to serve rather than asking, you could achieve far more than any traditional shaman. The spirits would fight you, the energies would resist. Your body would suffer as you channeled forces that were not meant to flow through mortal flesh. But if you had the will to continue, if you refused to break no matter what it cost, you could take their power and make it yours. I had nothing to lose. My body was already broken. My social standing was already worthless. Pain was simply pain, and I had lived with pain every day of my life. What was a little more? The first time I successfully commanded fire, without ritual, without prayer, without asking permission, I felt something I had never felt before. Not just power, freedom. For years I had been told that my worth was determined by others, by the shamans who judged me unworthy, by the hunters who saw me as useless, by the elements themselves who supposedly refused to answer my call. But this power came from me. I had seized it. I had forced reality to bend to my will through nothing but the strength of my intent. No one had given it to me. No one could take it away. I was 16 years old, and I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Power was not earned through virtue or granted through mercy. Power was taken, and once you understood that, once you truly accepted it, you became capable of anything. The other shamans noticed eventually. They sensed the wrong energies around me, the way I drew on the elements without the proper respect. They came to me and warned me that I was treading a dangerous path, that forcing the elements rather than working with them would lead to corruption, that I would become something twisted and dark. I asked them what they thought I already was. They had no answer to that. They had already judged me twisted and dark from birth. The only difference was that now I had power. They did not understand. They feared me. I felt that fear like warmth after years in the cold. Fear was honest. Fear did not pretend to pity while looking away. Fear acknowledged what I had become. Fear was respect disguised as horror. I wanted more of it. Gul'dan died when I was 18. The elements finally broke her, tore her apart from within as she attempted a working that required more strength than her aged body could channel. I found her collapsed in her hovel, her skin cracked and smoking, her eyes burned away. She was still breathing. She lasted 3 more hours. In that time, she told me everything she knew, every technique she had learned, every boundary she had pushed, every price she had paid. She told me that there were other powers beyond the elements, older powers, darker powers, powers that did not need to be forced because they wanted to be used. She told me to seek them out. She told me that I had the will to survive what would come next. Then she died, and I burned her body, and I began to search for the entities she had described. Power has a voice. Most people never hear it because they are not listening. They are too busy with their rituals and traditions, too committed to the structures that keep them comfortable even as those structures crush them. But if you are willing to be quiet, if you are willing to reach beyond the boundaries that others have drawn for you, you will hear it. A whisper at first, then a call, then a roar that drowns out everything you once believed. I was 19 when I first heard the whispers. I was alone in the mountains, far from my clan, practicing the techniques Gul'dan had taught me. I was attempting to draw energy directly from the earth, to pull the raw elemental force into myself without filter or ritual. The pain was extraordinary. It felt as though my bones were being ground to dust from within. But I held on. I refused to break. And in that moment of extremity, when my consciousness had been scraped raw by agony, I felt something else. A presence. Vast, ancient, interested. It did not speak in words. It communicated in concepts, in images, in pure understanding that bypassed language entirely. It showed me what I could become. It showed me power that made my crude elemental manipulation look like a child's game. It showed me armies. It showed me the orcs united under my will. It showed me conquest beyond anything my people had imagined. And it showed me the price, everything. Just as Gul'dan had said, everything I was, everything I could have been, all of it burned away in the service of becoming something greater, something terrible, something that would never be pitied again. I asked what it was. The presence laughed, and in that laugh I heard malice and promise in equal measure. It said, I already knew. It said I had been calling to it for years without realizing. Every time I had refused to accept my weakness, every time I had hated the world for the injustice of my existence, every time I had reached for power that others said I should not have, I had been calling to the darkness, and finally I was strong enough to hear its answer. The entity called itself many things: shadow, flame, entropy. It was demon energy, though I did not have that word yet. It was the power of the Burning Legion, an army of creatures that had been waging war across the cosmos since before my world had cooled from its creation. They destroyed worlds. They corrupted civilizations. They offered power to those willing to pay the price, and then they used those servants to bring about their own ends. I knew this. The presence made no attempt to hide it. It showed me exactly what it was and exactly what it would cost to accept its gifts. And I did not hesitate, not for a moment, because what was the alternative? To return to my clan and spend the rest of my days as a crippled shaman who could barely coax fire from his hands. To watch others rise to power while I scraped by on the margins of existence. To die forgotten and unmourned because I had been born wrong. The demons offered me a choice. They offered me the ability to reshape reality through sheer will. They offered me the tools to make everyone who had ever looked down on me kneel. And in exchange, all I had to give up was any pretense that I served anything but myself. I took the bargain. I took it because I was honest about what I wanted. I wanted power. I wanted revenge. I wanted to prove that strength was the only thing that mattered, and that I could have strength despite everything that should have prevented it. The shaman spoke of balance and harmony. I had never experienced either. Why should I mourn their loss? The Legion's power felt different from elemental energy. Where shamanic magic required negotiation and ritual, fell magic simply flowed. It wanted to be used. It burned with eagerness to consume and transform. When I drew on it, I felt no resistance, only hunger that matched my own. The first time I channeled feel energy through my body, it hurt worse than anything Gul'dan's techniques had inflicted. The power seared through channels that were not meant to hold it. My skin burned, my eyes bled. I felt my very essence being rewritten, warped into something that could contain forces no mortal was meant to touch. But when it was done, when I stood again and looked at my hands crackling with green fire, I felt more alive than I ever had. My legs still did not work properly. My spine was still twisted, but now I could levitate. I could move through the air with more grace than any hunter could achieve on foot. My physical weakness no longer mattered. I had transcended it. I began small. I did not announce my transformation to the clan. I did not challenge the shamans or confront those who had wronged me. I simply began to gather others who felt as I did. The outcasts, the bitter, those who had been told they were not good enough and who had festered in that knowledge rather than accepting it. I taught them what I had learned. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough to give them a taste of power they had been denied, enough to bind them to me through gratitude and fear. I showed them that the old ways were not the only ways, that strength could be taken if you were willing to pay the price. And one by one, they came to me. They made their own bargains. They took the fell into themselves and felt their weakness burn away. We called ourselves warlocks. We were those who had made war upon our own limitations and won. The shamans noticed the change in the younger orcs who followed me. They sensed the wrong energies, the corruption of fell magic spreading through the clan. They came to me and demanded I stop. They said I was endangering everyone with my experiments. They said the powers I was drawing on would consume us all. They were right, of course, but they were also weak. They could not stop me because I had already grown beyond their ability to contain. When they tried to bind me with their spirits, I burned the spirits away. When they called on the elements to strike me down, I showed them how easily elemental force could be overwhelmed by something older and hungrier. And when they realized they could not defeat me through power, they tried to turn the clan against me through politics and tradition. They went to the chieftain. They demanded I be exiled or executed. They said I was a threat to everything the Shadow Moon clan stood for. The chieftain hesitated. He was old and he remembered when I had been nothing but a crippled child that everyone ignored. The transformation frightened him, but he also saw what I had become. He saw the others who followed me. He saw that I had somehow found strength where none should exist. And he was afraid of what would happen if he moved against me. Fear is a tool. It is not something to be avoided or overcome. It is something to be cultivated in others and used to your advantage. The shamans made the mistake of thinking that fear would drive the clan to unite against me. They did not understand that fear cuts both ways. Yes, the orcs were afraid of what I represented, but they were also afraid of what would happen if they opposed me and failed. They had seen me burn spirits and elementals. They had seen me survive what should have killed me. They did not know the limits of my power because I was careful never to reveal them. Uncertainty is as powerful as actual strength. If your enemies do not know what you can do, they must assume you can do anything, and that assumption makes them weak. The chieftain tried to compromise. He said I could stay with the clan if I agreed to cease teaching others, if I kept my power to myself and did not spread the corruption further. It was a coward's solution. It changed nothing while pretending to address the problem. I agreed because I was not yet ready for open conflict. I agreed because I knew the compromise would not hold. I agreed because I wanted to give the chieftain enough rope to hang himself. I continued teaching in secret. I continued spreading the fell through those who were hungry for power. And when the shamans discovered this and came to the chieftain again, demanding action, he had no choice but to confront me. He came with warriors. He came with shamans. He came with all the authority of tradition and clan law. He stood before me and told me I was exiled, that I had broken my word and endangered the clan, and that I would leave before the next sunrise or be killed. I asked him if he truly believed he could kill me. He said it did not matter whether he believed it. It only mattered that he was willing to try. That is when I knew I had already won. The old structures were breaking. The chieftain was making decisions based on fear and pride, not strength. He was reacting to me rather than controlling me. He had already ceded the initiative. And once you lose the initiative in any conflict, you cannot regain it. I told him I would leave, but I would not leave alone. Any who wished to follow me would come. Any who had tasted real power and did not want to return to the old ways of limitation and weakness. I gave him until dawn to decide which was more important, the purity of his traditions or the loyalty of half his clan. By sunrise, 43 orcs stood with me. They were the young, the ambitious, the formerly powerless who had found in fell magic the strength they had always been denied. We left the Shadow Moonlands and moved into the wilderness. We were outcasts now, clanless. By traditional law, we had no right to live, no protection from other clans who might kill us for sport or territory. But we had something the traditionalists did not. We had the willingness to do anything to survive. We had power that did not require permission, and we had me to lead them. I was 23 years old. I had been nothing. Now I was feared. That was the first moment I understood what I had truly become. Not a warlock, not a teacher, a tyrant. Someone who ruled through strength and fear because those were the only currencies that mattered. Honor was a lie the strong told the weak to keep them compliant. Mercy was what you showed when you wanted to appear virtuous without sacrificing anything real. I had no use for either. I had truth, I had power, and I had the will to use both without apology. The world was dying. I saw it even then, though most refused to acknowledge it. Draenor was growing weaker. The elements were more difficult to commune with each year. The seasons grew harsher. The prey animals that had once been abundant were scarce. Shamans blamed our disrespect. They said we had taken too much, that we needed to return to proper balance. But I knew the truth. The world was not dying because we had broken some cosmic balance. It was dying because it was weak, because it could not sustain us anymore. And when you live on something that is dying, you have two choices. You die with it, or you find something else to consume. I chose consumption. The demons had shown me other worlds, countless worlds, worlds rich with life and resources, worlds that could be conquered and drained and abandoned when there was nothing left. The Legion had been doing this for eons. Why should we be different? Why should orcs cling to a dying rock out of sentiment when there were galaxies to take? But I could not do it alone. 43 warlocks were not enough to conquer anything. I needed the Horde, not just my clan, but all the clans, united under a single will. My will. The problem was that orcs do not unite easily. We are tribal. We are proud. Each clan has its own traditions, its own territory, its own reasons to hate the other clans. For generations, shamans had tried to create peace between the clans through councils and negotiations. They had failed because they were trying to convince warriors to give up their independence through reason and respect. I would succeed because I would give them no choice. I needed a weapon, not a physical weapon, though those would come later. I needed a psychological weapon. Something that would make the clans afraid enough to unite, but not so afraid that they would fragment completely. I needed an enemy. A threat so terrible that even the proudest chieftain would bend his knee to survive. And I needed that threat to be real enough that when I offered the solution, they would take it without question. The Draenei were perfect. They had lived on Draenor for generations, keeping to themselves in their glittering cities. They worshipped the light. They practiced healing and philosophy. They were everything the orcs were not. Peaceful, organized, united under a single prophet. Most orcs ignored them. We had no interest in their cities or their religion. We lived and let live because there was no benefit to conflict. But that could change. That had to change. Because if I could convince the orcs that the Draenei were a threat, if I could show them that these peaceful priests were actually planning our destruction, then I could unite the clans under the banner of survival. And once they were united, once they had tasted the blood of conquest, they would be mine. All I needed was proof. And if proof did not exist, I would create it. The demons had been whispering about the Draenei for years. They hated them. The Draenei had fled from the Legion across the cosmos, refusing to join or be destroyed. Their prophet, Velen, had escaped the Legion's corruption millennia ago. He was one of the few beings in the universe who had been offered power by the demons and refused it. The Legion wanted the Draenei exterminated. They wanted their prophet's head, and they were willing to give me everything I needed to make that happen. I approached the other warlocks I had trained. I showed them the vision the demons had shown me. Draenei forces massing in secret, Draenei weapons being forged, Draenei plots to enslave or exterminate the Orcish clans. None of it was true. But truth is what people believe, not what actually happened. And people believe what serves their interests. If you tell a warrior that his enemy is weak, he will ignore them. If you tell him that his enemy is preparing to destroy him, he will act. I told the chieftains that the Draenei were planning genocide. I showed them visions that the demons had crafted. False memories, fabricated prophecies. I spoke of Draenei agents poisoning our water sources, of Draenei sorcery draining the life from Draenor to fuel their cities, of Draenei scouts watching our villages and planning attacks. I had no evidence because I needed none. Fear does not require evidence. It requires only the suggestion of possibility and the willingness to act on that suggestion. The chieftains were skeptical at first. They knew the Draenei as distant neighbors, not enemies. But I had learned by then how to read orcs. I knew which chieftains were afraid of appearing weak. I knew which were ambitious and saw war as an opportunity for glory. I knew which were desperate because their clans were starving and needed a target for their rage. I tailored my approach to each one. To the proud, I spoke of honor and the need to strike first. To the ambitious, I spoke of conquest and the riches waiting in Draenei cities. To the desperate, I spoke of survival and the need to take resources before we all died. And I offered them all the same thing: power, fell magic, the strength to overcome any enemy, the ability to transcend the weakness that had kept orcs fighting each other instead of conquering the world. All they had to do was accept my guidance. All they had to do was make the same bargain I had made. All they had to do was become what I had become. Some refused. They said the fell was corruption, that it went against everything shamans had taught, that it would destroy us from within, even if we won. I did not argue with them. I simply made sure they understood the consequences of refusal. Those who would not join the Horde would be treated as enemies. They would have no protection when the war began. They would be alone against both the Draenei and the unified clans, and if they somehow survived that, they would still have to face me. Most bent. Most drank the fell blood when I offered it, feeling the power surge through them, feeling their bodies change and strengthen, watching their skin shift from brown to green as the corruption took hold. They felt the wrongness of it. They knew what they were doing, but they did it anyway because the alternative was extinction. That is the secret of tyranny. You do not need to make people love you. You do not even need to make them agree with you. You only need to make the alternative worse than submission. You only need to structure the choice so that refusing you is refusing survival itself. And once they have made that choice, once they have taken that first step into the darkness, they cannot go back. They are yours. Blackhand became war chief of the Horde. He was strong, brutal, respected by the warriors. He was also stupid and easily manipulated. I placed him in the position because I needed a figurehead. Someone the clans would follow who would not question my guidance. I remained Shadow Counsel. I remained the voice that whispered in the war chief's ear. I remained the one who made the real decisions while allowing Blackhand to believe he ruled. Power does not require a throne. It requires control. And I controlled everything that mattered: the warlocks, the field magic, the demons that were beginning to appear in greater numbers as we drew on their power. Blackhand gave orders. I decided what those orders would be. The Horde assaulted Shatrath first, the Draenei's holiest city. We struck without warning, without mercy. We killed everyone we found. Warriors, priests, children. It did not matter. The Legion wanted extermination, and the Horde wanted blood. I gave them both. The Draenei tried to defend themselves, but they were not warriors. They had spent generations in peace. Their magic was healing and protection, not destruction. They had no answer to fel-fueled rage in superior numbers. Shatrath fell in 3 days. We burned it. We killed so many Draenei that the streets ran with blood. And when it was over, when the city was nothing but corpses and ash, I watched the orcs celebrate their victory, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, only the cold understanding that this was working. The clans had united. They had tasted conquest. They would want more. We hunted the Draenei across Draenor for months. We destroyed their settlements. We killed their leaders. We drove them into the wilderness and picked them off in small groups. The few who survived scattered and hid. Velen escaped. The Legion was furious about that, but the majority of his people died. An entire civilization reduced to refugees and corpses. And the orcs, covered in Draenei blood, drunk on fell power, looked to me for guidance. What next? Where do we go now? What do we do with this strength we have been given? I told them about other worlds. I told them that Draenor was dying and we needed new lands to conquer. I told them that the same power that had let us destroy the Draenei could open portals to places beyond imagining. Places rich with resources and weak with soft races that did not understand war. I told them we would take everything. We would become a plague upon the cosmos, consuming world after world until there was nothing left to conquer. And they cheered. They raised their weapons and roared approval. Because I had given them purpose. Because I had transformed their dying culture into something that could survive. Because I had shown them that strength was enough. That you did not need honor or balance or tradition. You only needed the will to take what you wanted and the power to keep it. Magic has rules. Most sorcerers spend their lives learning those rules, working within the constraints that reality imposes on practitioners. They learn that certain spells require certain components, that some energies cannot be mixed, that distance limits what can be affected. That power has limits beyond which even the greatest mage cannot push. I learned early that rules were suggestions, frameworks designed by those who lacked the will to break them. If you had enough power, if you were willing to pay a sufficient price, if you truly did not care what it cost you, you could break any rule that stood in your way. You could make reality itself bend. You could achieve things that every expert said were impossible. Opening a portal between worlds was supposed to be impossible. Every mage who had studied the problem agreed. The distance was too great. The energies required were beyond what any single warlock or even a circle of warlocks could channel without killing themselves. Even the demons, for all their cosmic power, could not simply tear holes between dimensions at will. They needed anchors on both sides. They needed focal points. They needed someone in each location to establish the connection and maintain it. Without that, the distance between worlds was insurmountable. Reality itself would resist such a violation of natural law. I had none of these things. I had no anchor on Azeroth. I had no ally who could establish the other end of the portal. I had no way to even locate Azeroth precisely in the vast cosmos. All I had was desperation and access to powers that should never have answered an orcish warlock's call. All I had was the willingness to pay any price, to sacrifice anyone, to burn through my own life force if that was what it took. And I had the Burning Legion's desire to access new worlds to conquer. Our interests aligned perfectly. The demons wanted into Azeroth. I wanted off Draenor. Both of us needed a portal. Both of us were willing to do terrible things to make it happen. When interests align that completely, when two parties both benefit from cooperation, the rules stop mattering as much. You find ways around them. You discover loopholes in the laws of reality. You push until something breaks. The Guardian of Tirisfal was the key. I did not know his name at first. I did not know anything about him except what the demons told me. There was a human mage of extraordinary power somewhere on the world they called Azeroth. A world rich with life and magic. A world that had already caught the Legion's attention millennia ago. The demons had tried to invade Azeroth before and failed. The Guardian had stopped them. He had bound their forces. He had sent them screaming back into the void. The demons hated him for it. They wanted him broken as much as I wanted a way off Draenor. They showed me how to reach him, how to whisper across the impossible distance between worlds, and find a mind that might be susceptible to corruption, how to plant seeds of doubt and ambition in someone who believed himself righteous. It took months of effort. The Guardian's mind was well defended. His will was strong. He had been trained since childhood to resist exactly this kind of manipulation. But everyone has weaknesses. Everyone has desires they do not fully acknowledge even to themselves. Everyone has a place where their certainty cracks and lets the darkness seep in. I found his. His name was Medivh. He was the most powerful mage on Azeroth, perhaps the most powerful human mage who had ever lived. He was charged with protecting his world from threats both within and without. He had power that dwarfed anything I had achieved, access to magical traditions that were ancient when Draenor was young. He could reshape reality with gestures. He could see across dimensions. He could do things that should have been impossible even for the demons. But he was also alone, isolated by his strength, burdened by responsibility that no one else could share or even understand, frustrated with lesser mages who questioned him despite not comprehending the forces he commanded. Tired of being doubted by those he protected, he wanted recognition. He wanted to be acknowledged as the greatest mage who had ever lived, not just a guardian doing his duty. He wanted to prove that his power had no limits, that he could achieve things others said were impossible. I gave him that opportunity. I showed him the theoretical challenge of opening a portal between worlds. I provided him with frameworks and calculations that the demons had stolen from ancient sources. I suggested that such a feat would cement his legacy forever, that no mage in history, in any world, would match what he could achieve if he succeeded. I never mentioned the Horde. I never mentioned invasion. I presented it purely as an intellectual problem, a test of his abilities, a way to prove he was everything he believed himself to be. And he took it. Of course he took it. Because brilliant people are often the easiest to manipulate. They are so confident in their own intelligence that they do not see the obvious traps laid for them. They believe they are using you, even as you lead them exactly where you need them to go. Medivh began working on the portal from his side. I worked on it from mine. The energies required were immense beyond anything I had channeled before. I needed to drain power from sources that would kill me if I drew too deeply or too quickly. I needed to sacrifice warlocks who had served me for years, using their life force as fuel for the spell's construction. These were not enemies. These were followers who trusted me, who believed in the future I had promised. I killed them anyway because their deaths were necessary. I opened myself fully to the demons, letting them channel their power through me in ways that burned away what little remained of my original self. My body twisted further with each ritual. My skin darkened and cracked like cooling lava. My eyes became pits of green fire that saw across dimensions. I felt my humanity, such as it was, dying with every incantation. Every word of power stripped away another layer of what I had been. Every sacrifice pushed me further from orc and closer to demon, and I did not care. Humanity was weakness. Humanity was the crippled child begging the shamans for scraps of power. Humanity was mortality and limitation. Whatever I was becoming was stronger. Whatever price I was paying was worth it for what I would gain. Freedom from a dying world. Control over the future of my people. Power that would make me immortal in legend, if not in flesh. The portal opened. Not a stable gateway at first. Not anything we could maintain for long periods. Just a tear in reality. A wound between worlds that bled fell energy and madness. Through it, I could see Azeroth for the first time with my own eyes rather than through demonic visions. Green lands, abundant life. Forests that stretched to the horizon. Cities that gleamed in sunlight. It was everything I had hoped for. Everything Draenor had been before it began dying. Everything the Horde needed to survive. and all that stood between us and conquest was the act of walking through. The portal was unstable. It required constant maintenance. If I stopped feeding it power for even moments, it would collapse and might never be reopened, so I maintained it. I burned through warlocks faster now, setting up a rotation of sacrifices that could sustain the portal indefinitely. Some of those I killed had been with me from the beginning. Some had stood by me when I was exiled from the Shadow Moon. Some had learned fell magic at my side and considered me not just a leader, but something close to a friend. Their loyalty meant nothing against the necessity of the portal. Their trust was simply another resource to be consumed. This is what power requires. Not just the strength to hurt your enemies, but the willingness to sacrifice your allies when their deaths serve your purposes. Most people cannot cross that line. They tell themselves that loyalty matters, that some bonds are sacred, that there must be limits to what you will do. Those people stay weak. Those people die with their principles intact and their goals unachieved. I had learned long ago that principles were luxuries for those who could afford them. I sent scouts first, small parties to determine what we faced on the other side. They returned with tales of humans and dwarves and elves, races divided into kingdoms that spent as much time fighting each other as cooperating. No unified response to threats, no standing army that could match the Horde if we came in force. They had magic, yes, they had their guardian, but they were not prepared for what we would bring. They had grown soft in their prosperity. They had forgotten that survival was a constant struggle and that the moment you grew comfortable, something hungrier would come to devour you. They were ripe for conquest. They were weak in the ways that mattered. They had resources, but not the will to defend them properly. They had strength, but it was fractured across competing kingdoms. They were everything we needed them to be. Vulnerable. I gave the order. The Horde would march through the portal. We would establish a foothold on Azeroth and begin the conquest. We would take their resources, enslave their people, destroy anyone who resisted. We would turn their green world into a staging ground for further expansion across the cosmos. The Legion would be pleased. The Horde would survive. And I would have achieved what no orc had ever achieved before. I would have saved my people by dooming another race to extinction. Was it evil? The question is meaningless. Evil is what the weak call the actions of the strong when those actions harm them. The humans would call me evil. The Draenei, if any still lived, would call me evil. Anyone who stood in my path would call me evil because that word made them feel better about their own weakness. But would they be right? Or would they simply be angry that someone had the will to do what needed to be done without apology or hesitation? The Horde poured through the portal. Thousands of warriors, their skin green with corruption, their eyes burning with field fire and bloodlust. Warlocks channeling demonic energy to fuel their devastating spells. Raiding parties organized to fall on human settlements like locusts, stripping them of everything useful and leaving only corpses behind. We were unstoppable. We were everything the orcs had been capable of becoming once freed from tradition and weakness and the dying world that had tried to claim them. And I watched them go through, knowing that I had created this, that without me, every one of these orcs would have died on Draenor, that without me, they would have clung to their failing world and perished when it finally collapsed completely. I had given them life. That the life I gave them required the death of others was irrelevant. Survival is not moral. Survival is not evil. It simply is. You survive or you do not. Everything else is justification that the living invent to feel better about what they did to keep breathing. Stormwind fell first. The humans' greatest city, seat of their most powerful kingdom, reduced to rubble by orcish warriors who knew only how to destroy. King Lane died with his city. His kingdom fractured as survivors fled north toward Lordaeron. We followed, burning villages, slaughtering anyone who resisted, taking resources and territory, establishing bases from which to launch further attacks. It was glorious. Not because I enjoyed the killing. I felt nothing watching humans die, but because it proved everything I had believed. Strength decided everything. The humans had been comfortable and wealthy. They had built beautiful cities and written lovely poetry and developed sophisticated philosophies, and none of it saved them when something stronger came along. All their art and culture meant nothing in the face of raw power. They died as easily as anyone else. Their blood was just as red, their screams just as loud, their civilizations just as fragile. But I made mistakes. I thought I could control the Horde forever. I thought that because I had created their power, because I had opened the portal and given them access to Azeroth, they would always defer to me. I was wrong. Power has a way of growing beyond your control. The tool you forge to serve your purposes develops its own purposes. The weapon you create to fight your enemies turns on you. The warlocks I had trained began to develop their own ambitions. They had learned from me, after all. They had watched me rise from nothing through ruthlessness and will. Why should they not follow the same path? Why should they serve me when they could rule themselves? The chieftains started questioning why they needed me now that the war was going well. We had defeated Stormwind. We controlled significant territory on Azeroth. The portal was stable. What did I contribute that was still necessary? Black Hand was killed by Orgrim Doomhammer, a powerful warrior who had been skeptical of fell magic from the beginning. Doomhammer took the title of War Chief and immediately began purging the Shadow Council. He saw what I was. He understood that I was using the Horde for my own purposes. He decided that the Orcs should rule themselves, not serve as pawns in demonic games. He was not entirely wrong. I had been using them, but he made the mistake of thinking that meant I was weak, that I could be removed like any other advisor who had outlived his usefulness. He sent assassins. I killed them with fell fire before they could get close. He sent warriors in larger numbers. I killed them too, though it cost me more effort. He tried to turn the other warlocks against me, offering them positions of power in his new horde if they abandoned me. Some followed him. They saw which way the wind was blowing and decided their survival depended on joining the winning side. Most stayed loyal, not because they loved me, but because they feared what I would do if they betrayed me. Fear kept me alive longer than any other quality. Fear was the foundation of everything I had built, but fear is not infinite. Eventually, even the most terrified will find courage if they believe they can win. Doomhammer found allies among those who had never accepted fell magic. Shamans who had been quiet during the rise of the Horde, but who still practiced the old ways in secret. Traditionalists who saw corruption in our green skin and burning eyes. Warriors who valued honor and had always been uncomfortable with the brutality of our campaigns. He exposed my connection to the demons. He showed the Horde that I'd been planning to sacrifice them all eventually to fuel the Legion's greater ambitions, that I had never cared about Orcish survival except as a means to my own power, that everything I had done was service to forces that would ultimately consume us as thoroughly as we had consumed the Draenei. The Orcs who still clung to notions of honor were outraged. They turned on me. They hunted me like an animal. They wanted my head to prove they were not the monsters I had made them into, and I ran, not because I was afraid of death. Death had stopped frightening me long ago, but because I was not finished. I had more to achieve, more to prove. I would not die at the hands of warriors too stupid to understand what I had given them. Too proud to accept that without me, they would have died on Draenor. Too nostalgic for traditions that had been failing even before I offered them a better path. I fled to the Broken Isles, an ancient place cursed by the same cataclysm that had shattered the world thousands of years before. The elves had torn their continent apart with reckless magic, and these islands were what remained. There were ruins there. Night Elven ruins from when that race had still practiced arcane magic before deciding it was too dangerous and banning it. The tomb of Sargeras, a site of immense power buried beneath rock and sea and the weight of 10,000 years. I had heard legends about it during my time on Azeroth. Whispers from demons about the Dark Titan's avatar being entombed there after a failed invasion. About artifacts of power that could reshape reality. About knowledge that the Night Elves had hidden away because they feared what it could do. The demons wanted those artifacts. They wanted the knowledge contained in that tomb, and I wanted to survive long enough to prove that Doomhammer had made a mistake in turning against me. The tomb was everything the legends promised. It was also a trap. The Night Elves had not simply sealed it. They had filled it with guardians, with magical constructs designed to kill anyone who tried to plunder its secrets, with curses that would drain the life from any mortal who walked its halls for too long, with wards that prevented teleportation or easy escape. It was designed to be impenetrable. A prison not just for Sargeras's avatar, but for anyone foolish enough to seek what was imprisoned there. I walked those halls anyway. I killed the Guardians with fell fire, burning through constructs that had stood watch for millennia. I endured the curses because I had already endured worse. I felt my life draining away with each step, felt my body weakening as the tomb's defenses worked on me, but I pushed forward. Pain was familiar. Death was a possibility I had accepted long ago. What I could not accept was failure. I could not accept that after everything I had achieved, I would die hunted and powerless. I would take what was in this tomb and use it to prove myself again. I would rise from this defeat stronger than before, and I found what I was looking for in the deepest chamber of the tomb. The Eye of Sargeras, an artifact of the Dark Titan himself, left behind when his avatar had been defeated and imprisoned. A gem that could channel destruction on a scale I had never imagined. With it, I could open portals without needing cooperation from mages on the other side. I could summon demons directly from the twisting nether without rituals or preparation. I could reshape the world according to my will. All I had to do was take it. All I had to do was survive long enough to claim it. The tomb fought me. The entire structure seemed to wake as I reached for the eye. Walls shifted. Guardians emerged from stone where none had been before. The air itself became hostile, thick with magic that wanted me dead. I fought for 3 days without rest. I burned through the few warlocks who had followed me into exile, using their lives as fuel for my spells, just as I had used others to open the portal. I consumed their souls to sustain myself when my own strength faltered. I did what I had always done. I refused to break. I refused to accept defeat. I paid every price that was demanded and refused to care what it cost me. Eventually, the tomb stopped fighting. The Guardians fell. The curses faded, and I held the Eye of Sargeras in my hands, feeling its power singing through me, knowing that I had achieved something that should have been impossible. I had plundered the Dark Titan's own repository. I had taken his power and made it mine. No other mortal on any world had done what I had just done. I was vindicated. I was proven. I was everything I had always believed myself capable of becoming. But I was also not invincible. The tomb had taken more than I wanted to admit. My body was failing faster now. The field corruption had spread so deeply that I was more demon than orc. My physical form was becoming tenuous, struggling to contain the energies I channeled. My connection to the material world was weakening. I could feel myself beginning to slip into the twisting nether, becoming something that existed more in that dimension than this one. I needed to anchor myself. I needed something to tie me to reality before I dissolved completely into fell energy. And I needed it soon. Orgrim Doomhammer came with warriors. He had tracked me to the Broken Isles, following the trail of destruction I had left. He was determined to end me once and for all, to purge the horde of my influence permanently, to prove that orcs could survive without demons and warlocks. He brought his best fighters. He brought shamans to counter my magic. He brought everything he thought he needed to kill me. He was wrong, but not as wrong as he should have been. I was weaker than I wanted to admit. The tomb had drained me more than I realized. The Eye of Sargeras was powerful, but using it required more strength than I possessed in my current state. And Doomhammer was not stupid. He had learned from previous failures. He did not try to face me directly in magical combat. He destroyed the foundations of the tomb instead, brought the entire structure crashing down into the sea, buried me under tons of rock and seawater, sealed me away as the night elves had sealed Sargeras himself. It should have killed me. It nearly did. The Eye of Sargeras was torn from my hands as the tomb collapsed. I felt my physical body being crushed under the weight of falling stone, felt my bones breaking one by one, felt the cold water of the ocean rushing in to drown what remained of my lungs, felt everything I had worked for crumbling around me, and then I felt something else, the twisting nether calling to me, the demons offering sanctuary in their realm, a way to survive by abandoning my physical form completely, by becoming something that existed purely as will and power and hatred, a spirit tethered to demonic energy rather than flesh. I took it. What choice did I have? I let my body die. I let the tomb become my grave as it had been intended as Sargeras's grave, and I fled into the twisting nether, becoming something that was neither alive nor dead, neither orc nor demon, something in between. Something that should not exist according to the natural laws of any reality. But I existed anyway because I refused to do otherwise, because even death was not enough to stop me. Because I had learned long ago that rules were for those too weak to break them, and I was not weak. I had never been weak. My body had been weak, my social standing had been weak, my clan's position had been weak, but my will, my hatred, my absolute refusal to accept the limitations that reality tried to impose on me, those had never been weak, and they never would be. The Horde failed in the end. They lost the war on Azeroth. They were rounded up and placed in internment camps by the humans they had tried to conquer. They were broken and defeated, reduced to slaves laboring for their former enemies. The field magic that had made them strong now made them sick, the corruption eating them from within when they could no longer feed it with conquest and bloodshed. Doomhammer died eventually, killed by humans or his own people depending on which story you believe. The clans fractured without a strong war chief to hold them together. Everything I had built collapsed without me to maintain it. And I felt nothing, no regret, no guilt, no sense of responsibility for what had happened. They had served their purpose. They had survived when they should have died. That they had ultimately failed to hold what they conquered was their weakness, not mine. I had done what I promised. I had given them power. I had opened the way to new worlds. I had transformed them from a dying race into conquerors. If they lacked the strength to complete the conquest, if they lacked the ruthlessness to do what was necessary to hold their gains, that was not my failing. It was theirs. I had shown them the path. I had given them the tools. What they did with those tools was their responsibility. I exist still, not in the way I once did, not in flesh and bone and the physical world where most beings live out their brief existences, but in will and power and the absolute certainty that I was right, that everything I did was necessary, that the orcs would have died on Draenor if I had not acted, that the Horde would never have risen without my guidance, that strength is the only thing that matters in a universe that does not care whether you live or die. I exist in the twisting nether, in that space between dimensions where demons dwell and where mortal souls sometimes end up when they have been too deeply corrupted to go anywhere else. I exist as something that should not be possible, a consciousness maintained by pure will when the body that housed it has long since rotted away. I exist because I refuse not to, because accepting death would be accepting that I had been defeated, and I have never accepted defeat. They call me villain, monster, betrayer of my people. They say I sold orcish souls for power. They say I destroyed Draenor through my reckless use of fell magic. They say I murdered millions for my own ambition. They say I corrupted an entire race and doomed them to generations of suffering. All of this is true, But it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is more complicated than heroes and villains. The whole truth is that I saw weakness and refused to accept it. I saw a dying world and found a way to escape it. I saw a fragmented people and united them. I saw extinction approaching and chose a different path. That the methods were brutal does not change the results. That the price was high does not mean it was not worth paying. They do not tell you this when they speak of honor and righteousness and the proper way to live. They do not tell you that every great civilization was built on the corpses of the ones that came before. That every hero has committed atrocities in the service of their goals. They simply had the luxury of writing the history afterward. That the only difference between a villain and a savior is whether you won and whether your victims survived to tell their version of events. I did not win. Not completely. Not permanently. The horde fell. The portal closed. Draenor tore itself apart in the aftermath of our conquest, the world finally succumbing to the corruption that had been killing it for years. Everything I built was destroyed or corrupted beyond recognition, but I achieved more than any crippled outcast had any right to achieve. I took weakness and transformed it into power. I took a dying race and gave them a future, even if that future was blood-soaked and terrible. I proved that will alone was enough to reshape reality, that you did not need to be born strong or chosen or blessed by fate. You only needed to refuse to accept your limitations. You only needed to be willing to do what others would not, to endure what others could not, to sacrifice what others held sacred. Fear was my tool because fear was honest. Love lies. It tells you that people act from noble motives when they act from self-interest. Honor lies. It tells you that there are rules everyone follows when the strong simply do what they want. Loyalty lies. It tells you that bonds matter when people abandon each other constantly for their own benefit. All of them are masks that people wear to hide their true motivations. But fear reveals. Fear strips away the pretense and shows you exactly where you stand. When someone fears you, they cannot pretend to respect you while planning your downfall. They cannot smile to your face and plot behind your back without you sensing it. Their fear betrays their intentions. Their fear shows you what they truly think. Fear is truth. And truth was all I ever wanted. Not the comfortable lies that the shamans told themselves about balance and harmony. Not the pretty stories that heroes tell about sacrifice and virtue. Just the raw, unvarnished truth that strength decides everything. That the weak suffer and the strong take. That the universe is not fair and never will be. That survival is the only goal that matters and everything else is decoration. And that the only question that matters is whether you will be strong enough to survive. I look back at the crippled child I was, and I feel nothing. No nostalgia for lost innocence. No regret for what I became. No sorrow for the path I chose. That child was weak, and he deserved to suffer until he found the strength to change. The orcs who pitied me were weak, and they deserved to follow someone who was strong. The Draenei who tried to live in peace were weak, and they deserved to be scattered across the stars. The humans who thought their walls would protect them were weak, and they deserved to watch their cities burn. Weakness is sin in a universe that respects only power. Weakness is the crime for which there is no forgiveness, and I have never apologized for refusing to be weak. I have never apologized for doing what needed to be done. I have never apologized for paying every price and demanding every reward. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not want it. Forgiveness is what the guilty beg for when they lack the courage to own their actions. I owned every decision I made, every life I took, every soul I consumed, every world I helped destroy. I did it with full knowledge of the consequences. I did it because it served my purposes. I did it because I could. And if I could return to flesh and walk the world again, if I could have another chance at life in the material realm, I would do it all over, every bit of it. I would make the same choices. I would pay the same prices. Not because I enjoyed the suffering I caused. I took no pleasure in the screams of the dying or the sight of burning cities, but because the alternative was accepting my own weakness, accepting the judgment of those who looked down on me, accepting that the world was right to mark me as lesser, and I would rather die 1,000 times than accept that. This is what it means to rule through fear. Not the petty fear that tyrants inspire through random cruelty and unpredictable violence, but the deep, existential fear that comes from recognizing power without limit or apology. The fear that acknowledges I would sacrifice anything, including myself, to achieve my goals. The fear that understands I have already paid every price and have nothing left to lose. The fear that knows I am not pretending, that when I say I will burn your world to ash if you stand in my way, I mean it literally and completely. That I have done it before and will do it again without hesitation or doubt. Heroes pretend they do not want power. They pretend they act only from duty or love or some higher purpose. It is all lies. Self-deception at best. Deliberate manipulation at worst. They want power as much as anyone. They simply lack the honesty to admit it. They need to believe they are righteous. They need to believe that their violence is justified because they serve a noble cause. They need the lies because without them, they would have to confront what they truly are. I never needed that lie. I always knew what I was. I was someone who wanted power and took it. Someone who saw the rules of reality and decided they did not apply to me. Someone who paid every price and demanded every reward. Someone who refused to apologize or justify or explain beyond simple truth. I did what I did because I could and because I wanted to. That honesty terrified people more than any amount of cruelty. They could understand cruelty. They could fight against it. They could oppose a villain who reveled in evil and proclaimed himself the enemy of all that was good, but someone who simply did not care about their moral categories. Someone who looked at their concepts of good and evil and saw only tools to manipulate. Someone who had no interest in being evil any more than in being good, who simply pursued power with absolute focus. That was incomprehensible. That was terrifying in a way that no amount of violence could match, because violence could be opposed. Evil could be fought. But how do you fight someone who does not accept that your rules apply to them? How do you defeat someone who has already sacrificed everything you could threaten? How do you negotiate with someone who wants nothing except to prove that will is enough to overcome any obstacle? You cannot. And that inability is what created the fear that sustained my power even after my physical death. I am Gul'dan. I was a cripple who became a warlock, an outcast who became the architect of a genocidal war, a mortal who touched powers that should have destroyed me and instead became something beyond mortal understanding. I destroyed my world. I corrupted my people. I murdered millions. I sacrificed allies and enemies alike in the pursuit of power. And I would do it again because the alternative was accepting that the powerful were right to look down on me, that the shamans were right to reject me, that the world was right to mark me as lesser simply because my body was twisted. I proved them wrong. I proved that strength comes from will, not from birth or blessing or the approval of spirits and elements. I proved that power can be taken by anyone willing to pay the price. I proved that the rules that keep most people in their place are only as strong as your willingness to obey them. This is what they do not teach you. This is what the heroes and the priests and the philosophers refuse to acknowledge because acknowledging it would undermine everything they claim to believe. The world is not fair. It was never meant to be fair. Fairness is an illusion created by those who have enough power to insulate themselves from consequences. And pretending otherwise is the greatest weakness of all. Pretending that virtue matters more than strength, that good intentions matter more than results. That suffering is somehow noble if you endure it with dignity. All lies. Comfortable lies that keep the weak in their place and the strong in power. I never pretended. I never apologized. I never asked for mercy or forgiveness or understanding. I simply took what I wanted and dared anyone to stop me. I dared the elements to strike me down. I dared the shamans to overcome me. I dared the chieftains to oppose me. I dared the Draenei to survive my genocide. I dared the humans to hold their kingdoms against the horde I unleashed. I dared reality itself to break me. And I am still here. Diminished, perhaps. Defeated by some measures, but still existing when I should have died a crippled child, or a failed shaman, or a hunted warlock. Still conscious when my body rotted away decades ago. Still possessing will and purpose, and the certainty that I was right. That is what it means to rule through fear. That is what it means to reject every comfortable lie civilization tells itself. That is what it means to be honest about power. And if that makes me a monster, then the word has no meaning, because everyone is a monster when you strip away the pretense. Everyone wants power. Everyone would commit atrocities if the price was right and the gain was sufficient. Everyone tells themselves lies to justify the harm they cause. I simply stopped lying to myself, and that made me stronger than those who never could.